Imagine waking up to flashing police lights outside your college home. 4 university students had been brutally murdered overnight. There were no signs of forced entry. 2 roommates inside the house survived. And for weeks, investigators had no suspect. Then, the evidence led them to someone almost nobody expected, a criminology PhD student who had spent years studying crime itself. This is the story of the Idaho student murders. Introduction. November 2022. The small college town of Moscow, Idaho, was known for being peaceful and safe. Students walked home late at night without thinking twice. Violent crime was rare. That sense of security disappeared in a single night. On November 13, 4 students from the University of Idaho were found dead inside an off-campus house on King Road. The shocking murders quickly became one of the biggest criminal investigations in recent American history. Police worked around the clock, while millions of people followed every update, trying to understand who could have committed such a horrifying crime. The victims. The 4 victims were young university students with bright futures ahead of them. 21-year-old Kaylee Goncalves was preparing for graduation and had recently accepted a new job. Her close friend, Madison Mogan, was known for her warm personality and had been friends with Kaylee for years. Xana Kernadal was energetic and outgoing. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was also at the house that night after the two had spent the evening together. Friends described all 4 as kind, social, and excited about their future. No one could have imagined that an ordinary Saturday night would become their last. The night before the murders. On the evening of November 12, each of the victims spent time with friends at different locations around town. Kaylee and Madison were seen together before returning home later that night. Xana and Ethan attended a gathering before also heading back to the King Road house. By the early hours of November 13, everyone appeared to be home. Nothing seemed unusual. The neighborhood was quiet. Inside the house, the students likely believed they were safe. But sometime before sunrise, everything changed. A violent attack took place inside the home. By the time the sun came up, 4 young lives had been taken. The case would soon capture the attention of the entire nation. The discovery. The morning of November 13 started like any other Sunday. But inside the King Road house, something was terribly wrong. At approximately 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was made from the home after one of the roommates and other people who had come to the house realized that something was seriously wrong. When officers arrived, they made a discovery that would shock even experienced investigators. 4 University of Idaho students had been fatally stabbed inside the residence. Police immediately secured the area, turning the quiet neighborhood into an active crime scene. Yellow crime scene tape surrounded the house. Forensic teams began collecting every possible piece of evidence. News helicopters circled overhead as reporters gathered outside. Within hours, the story spread across the United States. The surviving roommates. One of the most talked about details of the case was that 2 roommates survived the attack. According to court documents, one surviving roommate later told investigators that she had heard unusual sounds during the night. At one point, she looked outside her bedroom and reported seeing a man dressed in dark clothing with a mask covering his mouth and nose walking past her toward the back of the house. She described him as having noticeable eyebrows. The man then left the house. This eyewitness account would later become one important part of the investigation. A mystery with no clear suspect. Investigators faced an enormous challenge. There was no immediate suspect. No obvious motive was publicly identified. The murders appeared to have happened quickly and silently. Rumors began spreading across social media. Thousands of people created theories online. Some accused innocent individuals without evidence. Police repeatedly asked the public not to spread misinformation and said they were carefully following verified evidence instead. Behind the scenes, detectives worked day and night. They reviewed surveillance videos from nearby homes and businesses. They collected digital evidence, interviewed witnesses, and searched for anything that could identify the killer. Then, one detail changed the direction of the investigation. A white sedan was seen driving near the King Road house around the time of the murders. At first, it was just another vehicle on camera. But investigators believed it could be connected to the case. Finding that car became one of the investigation's highest priorities. The mystery was finally beginning to take shape. The white Hyundai Elantra. Investigators reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage. One vehicle kept appearing near the crime scene. It was a white Hyundai Elantra. The car was seen driving around the King Road neighborhood multiple times during the early morning hours before the killings. Then, shortly after the estimated time of the attacks, the same vehicle appeared to leave the area at a high rate of speed. At first, detectives didn't know who owned the car. But they believed it could hold the key to solving the case. Police publicly asked for information about a white Hyundai Elantra manufactured between 2011 and 2013. Within days, tips began pouring in from across the country. Following the evidence. While one team tracked the vehicle, another focused on digital evidence. Investigators reviewed phone records, surveillance footage, and other forensic evidence. According to court filings, they believed a phone associated with Bryan Kohberger had been in the area of the King Road house on multiple occasions before the murders. However, prosecutors have alleged this as part of their case, and the defense has challenged parts of the evidence. Investigators also linked a white Hyundai Elantra registered to Kohberger with the type of vehicle they had been searching for. As different pieces of evidence were compared, detectives believed they were getting closer to identifying a suspect. The DNA lead. One of the most significant developments came from forensic testing. According to prosecutors, a knife sheath found at the crime scene contained DNA evidence. Investigators later compared that evidence with DNA obtained during the investigation. Prosecutors have said the results supported their case against Bryan Kohberger. The defense, however, has disputed aspects of the prosecution's evidence and arguments. These issues became important topics during the court proceedings. The investigation turns. By late December 2022, investigators believed they had enough evidence to take action. The investigation had gone from a mysterious quadruple homicide with no clear suspect to a case centered on one man. But the arrest would happen hundreds of miles away from the crime scene. And when it did, the entire country was watching. The arrest. On December 30, 2022, more than 6 weeks after the murders, the investigation reached a dramatic turning point. Before sunrise, law enforcement officers surrounded a home in Pennsylvania. Inside was 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student who had been studying at Washington State University. Without warning, officers moved in and arrested him. News of the arrest spread across the country within minutes. For many people, one question stood out above all others. How could someone studying criminal behavior become the prime suspect in one of America's most shocking murder cases? Back to Idaho. After his arrest, Kohberger appeared in court in Pennsylvania. He did not fight extradition and was later transferred to Idaho, where he would face the charges. As he arrived back in Moscow, Idaho, cameras from around the world captured every moment. The once quiet college town was again filled with reporters, satellite trucks, and curious onlookers. The case had become international news. The prosecution's case. In court filings, prosecutors outlined several key pieces of evidence they said linked Kohberger to the crime. These included surveillance footage of a white Hyundai Elantra, cell phone data, eyewitness testimony from a surviving roommate, and DNA evidence that prosecutors said was recovered from a knife sheath found at the scene. Prosecutors argued that, taken together, these pieces of evidence pointed to Kohberger as the person responsible. The defense responds. Kohberger has pleaded not guilty to the charges. His defense team has challenged parts of the prosecution's evidence and has argued that the state must prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. As with any criminal trial, the charges alone do not determine guilt. The court process is designed to examine the evidence presented by both sides before reaching a final legal outcome. A case that captured the world. The Idaho student murders quickly became one of the most closely followed criminal cases in modern America. Millions of people watched every court hearing. Every new document filed in court made headlines. Online discussions exploded with theories, questions, and debates. But behind all the headlines were 4 young lives that had been cut tragically short. And for their families, no amount of media attention could erase that loss. The shocking turn. For more than 2 years, millions of people expected one of the biggest murder trials in American history. But just weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin, everything changed. On July 2, 2025, Bryan Kohberger stood in court and pleaded guilty to the murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, as well as a burglary charge. The guilty plea meant there would be no jury trial. In exchange, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. The sentencing. On July 23, 2025, the courtroom was filled with grief. Family members and friends of the victims delivered emotional impact statements. Some spoke directly to Kohberger. Others focused on remembering the lives of the 4 students whose futures had been stolen. When the judge invited Kohberger to speak, he declined to make a statement. The court sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional prison term for burglary. The legal case had reached its conclusion. But for the victims' families, the pain would never truly end. The question that remains. Even after the guilty plea, one question continues to haunt investigators, journalists, and the public. Why? No clear motive has ever been publicly established in court. Many theories have circulated online, but speculation is not evidence. The full reason behind the attack remains unknown. Sometimes, the most disturbing mysteries are not about who committed the crime. They're about why it happened in the first place. Final message. The Idaho student murders changed a quiet college town forever. 4 young people lost their lives. Their families lost sons and daughters. Friends lost classmates. And an entire community lost its sense of security. This case reminds us that behind every headline are real people whose lives can never be replaced. Some crimes leave behind more questions than answers. The Idaho student murders may be legally closed, but the pain for the victims' families will last a lifetime. Justice can deliver a sentence, but it can never bring back the people who were lost. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy well-researched true crime documentaries based on verified public information, subscribe for more stories every week. Until next time. Stay safe.